you very much. And yeah, I've got that slot that's just after lunch, right? So people have arrived here, maybe hoping to be energized and picked up after lunch by looking at some data. I don't know. Maybe that might not be the best idea, but I'll do my best to keep you engaged. I guess on that point, um, there is. Well, I need to say thank you. I need to say thank you for I appreciate everybody that has been involved in making this event happen. I'm essentially unknown in the public space, so I really appreciate that opportunity just to be able to be here, talk, learn, and I've loved hearing the talks, especially yesterday. Um, on a number of different topics and the questions that people were asking at the end. So I guess I'm hoping for a similar kind of learning experience with that because it's not just my first Agile conference. It's the first time I've spoken at one of these types of events. So yeah, I'm really grateful to be here, and I appreciate all the effort that people do behind the scenes, especially voluntarily. So thank you for that. Thank you to everybody else for being here, and I want to say thank you for those people that have responded to the polls that I put out in Hoover. I put out 3 polls. What I've done is I've taken the data from those polls and I've included those in this talk we're going to do. We're going to take a little look at that data. If you had no idea it existed, you could go into Hoover. I'll invite you to go and do that. It won't make it into the talk, but I will update any of my material with those results because I think the plan is for the slide decks to be shared. So I'm happy to go ahead and do that. But I think I should then say, because I've invited you to go into Hoover and do some stuff, I think it's going to be easier if you've got comments, questions, you want to actually engage with us in this session right now, it's going to be easier to do that in Zoom. So please use the Zoom chat. There will be a couple of points when I'll need to ask you some questions. So yeah, please get involved. Bring in the data. I mean, how ironic would it be if I invited you to a session saying bring the data and didn't bring data? So again, thanks for completing the polls. The first question that I'd asked was, have your past retrospectives been informed by data? And this is just 2 instances, 2 platforms where I asked the same question. On the left is the Hoover results, and on the right was LinkedIn. The same question. And perhaps you can let me know whether this data surprises you or not. To that, as an answer to that question.
James,
Yep.
I don't think we see your presentation.
Thank you.
No worries.
Let's fix it. Sorry about this. Doesn't matter how many times I go through it, and I think that's probably my problem here because I mentioned listening to a lot of talks yesterday. It's because I spent this morning flapping. It's incredible how doing something that I do every day, talking to people in Zoom about a topic that I'm passionate about, I can be incredibly nervous about. So this morning was spent going through all this content again and again. I guess that flap's materialized here. So, thanks for your patience. This is the data. Hopefully you can see that.
No. Nope.
Ah!
Yes.
Yes, we can see it now.
Okay. Yeah, sorry. I'll get better. And yeah, this is the data. It surprised me at least. So if you still want to contribute with your thoughts, then please do. The question was, have your past retrospectives been informed by data? I was surprised. I actually thought this was overly positive. It was much more positive than I expected. Given my experience working with teams, it's always felt quite novel when I've started helping them understand data and use their own data. So learning that data doesn't just need to be a management tool for people to use carrot or stick to find out what's going on with it within a team. But then I realised something that this community, people that have responded, at least in the poll on the left, are engaging, are invited, have pulled uh, a learning opportunity from this Agile conference. That's a bunch of people who are passionate about continuous personal development and learning new ways to be able to support your teams. And I'd argue it's probably quite similar over on the right hand side with LinkedIn. And I think with that, what I'm saying is there's a good chance, I would assert, that there are plenty of people that would just not even see these polls because they've got no interest in continuously improving. But unfortunately, they happen to be in those positions where they should be serving and facilitating the teams through continuous improvement. Nevertheless, I appreciate you providing that data. It surprised me. And, if you do have some thoughts that you'd like to share, then please do. And this question I won't ask you to respond to in the chat. I'm just going to make up some time. But I would assert that the reason why we carry out an activity like retrospecting, regardless of whether it's a planned event or we just do it continuously, is because, particularly in the product development space, we're on a relentless journey for continuously improving. There's always something that we can tweak and optimize for the life that there is a product that we're building. Perhaps, unfortunately, some of the reasons that people are retrospecting is because a Scrum Guide says so. But I'd like to think that when we go through that activity of identifying some dysfunctions, making some changes to be able to improve our system, that what we end up building is a shared sense of ownership for the people that are doing the work. And I think it's especially relevant when you think about the amount of time that we commit to doing that. So the third of those polls was about how much time people are spending on average, committed, focused on that topic of continuous improvement. These are averages, and perhaps the word cloud didn't work as well as I might have liked. There's 1 hour and a 1. So just to make things easier, I've put some percentages over on the right-hand side. So of the 14 people that responded to the poll, the vast majority, 43%, spend on average 1 hour per week focused on continuous improvement. It surprised me that the very next highest one at 28% was at the far opposite end of the spectrum. It was down at the 15 minutes. And when we bear in mind that that's not just 15 minutes, it's not just an hour. Let's take the 15 minutes as an example. That's 15 minutes times by the number of people that are engaging in that session. And I think it's our responsibility to make sure it's everybody's, but people facilitating those sessions, try and make sure that time is spent as valuably as possible. My argument is that there's so many valuable things that we could do with the retrospective. It's a crying shame if we don't capitalize on that opportunity, but we should be looking at opportunities to bring data into those discussions. But I'd like to know why you think, this is where I definitely want you in the chat. I would like you to think of 2 advantages that you can think of to support an argument for bringing data into a retrospective discussion. And what I think I've done is there's a whole heap of info on here. I think I'll have hit on most of these, but there is a more, right? I've got a get out here. That more. This is not a comprehensive list. I'm very biased. I'm very passionate about bringing the data. And here are some of the reasons why I think that's especially important. I think it correlates with most of the responses as well. So there's some visual emphasis on this one, on the objective insights, and that's because in the past I've certainly experienced unhealthy conflict, potentially even hostility, and at the very least wasted time having discussions about whether there is even a problem. So just one opinion against another. And when we're talking about data, it's no longer a why question. Okay, it can be. There might be reasons why data set says something and we might not necessarily agree with it. Normally, it's because we haven't updated a tool. Something looks like it's been active for a lot longer than it was because we just didn't mark it as done before. But I'd say that the more that the team gets to use this is the point that's the cycle over on the right-hand side, the data-driven culture feeding back to improved data hygiene. The more that teams actually use their data, the more reason that they see to actually keep something as simple as their data hygiene up to date, because they're not doing it for some external party. They're doing it for themselves. They're doing it so that they've got better information to be able to make decisions about the continuous improvement activities. That becomes a self-fulfilling cycle. So you end up with better data, so you've got more uses for it, you've got more credible results, and you see more benefits in using the data, so it's more up to date, and it just, that cycle goes round. It's a healthy cycle. And so one of those polls was about the given that some people are already bringing data into their retrospectives, what are the data points that they're using? We are going to focus on flow metrics. WIP stands for work in progress, which is part of those flow metrics. And I would love to touch on CFD, but for those that aren't aware of a CFD, it's a cumulative flow diagram. It is a really great resource because it helps you visualize those flow metrics that we will touch on. So that's what we'll cover here. And some of those others, gross profit, automation percentage, velocity, one-on-ones, team health. I'm not going to cover those in this part. But what I would say is that, yes, I have my biases. Yes, I'm going to talk about flow data. The flow metrics, and I'll explain what they are shortly, they are essentially the minimum viable metrics that we could be considering for inspecting our system. It is fully expected and anticipated that you've got particular data points within your own system that relate to probably topics more like this. So if your team is going to be spending time tracking metrics related to team health, my only ask is that you use it. If you're tracking metrics, you should be using them to make informed decisions about changes in the future. Great. So I should probably get into the meat of this. So I think that there are two main reasons why some people might struggle to bring data to a retrospective. And that comes down to familiarity and awareness. So sometimes people aren't aware of some of these tools that can be very effective, and even those that are aware of them don't necessarily know how to read and interpret them. So I've probably gone to my whiteboard a bit too quickly. I should explain. I had two choices here myself. So I figured I could either explain to you a whole heap of useful metrics and data points that I find useful for different circumstances, or I could focus on the one that I think is the most valuable. I've chosen to do that. And I'm going to show you how you can. I just want to explain it as fundamentally as I can. So here we've got a workflow on this little whiteboard. I don't know how blurry it might be for you, but you don't need to worry too much about what these columns say. The first one's to do, and then design, make, ship, and done. Hopefully, you're all pretty familiar with bringing some work into a process, going through some of these workflow states, and then exiting a system. And what I want to be able to do is essentially show you how fundamental, how basic some of these things can be, and then when you know how to apply the tools and techniques, then you get some really powerful results. So if we've got a work item that's going through this system, let's just call it very valuable item number 1. It's going through our system. We know the date that it's been raised. So specific date doesn't matter, and I'll tell you why in a minute. Let's just say that it was created sometime in September. Let's say the September the 1st. So it existed. That work item existed within this state to do in September. And there are a whole heap of other items. Very valuable item 9, 12. These are potential work items that this team are going to work on in the future. And I should highlight where to start. So if we're going to try and use this data, one of the most important things that we need to understand is our start point and finish point. At what point do we consider this work has actually started? And it could be, it's viable to say that it started as soon as it's in to do. There are definitely circumstances when, as soon as a work item exists, that a clock might start ticking before we actually get that stuff through to complete. But for this example, I'm going to say that design, put this little magnet there to imply a start point, say that once a work item has crossed that boundary and into design, that's the point when we are investing time to do something on the work item. And in this hypothetical scenario, I'm saying that's the start point. Then goes through its design activities. When it's been designed, it'll go through to make and then ship. I'm going to say that the end point is between the ship and done. Hopefully you can just bear with me on that. What I should mention is that you can have multiple start points and multiple endpoints in your system, and maybe depending on how the questions go, we might cover that in more detail. But by having a defined start point and defined endpoint, we can measure how long it takes for work items to get from the start to the endpoint. So very valuable item one, let's say that we decided to actually start work and designing it on the 1st of October. I'm essentially saying, now imagine it's not a whiteboard, imagine it's a spreadsheet. And we're just tracking the date that it went through into design, and then the date that it's transitioned over into make, which could be, let's say, the 3rd of October. The team's been making for a little while, goes into ship on the 7th of October, and then it's done on the 10th. By measuring the start time and the finish time, we could say that this item had a cycle time of 10 days because it took 10 days to get from this point to this point. That's how long it spent in the system. I'm sure you can imagine that once you've done that for very valuable item 9 as well, and you've got dates in here, and you've got this for a whole series of your data, it can be quite hard to just look at that text and actually interpret that in a valuable way. So all we can do is visualize it in a slightly different way. So we've got two axes here. I'll explain what those are. The axis across the bottom is simply calendar day or time. I'm going to use days. I don't want to confuse things. You could use hours. You could be measuring these things in hours if your environment is such. But let's just say that they're calendar days. And because the first item finished on the 10th of October, that's when I'm going to start this. So I'm going to say that that's the 10th of October. Hopefully that's all still visible on screen. And we would just have little notches across the bottom of this chart for days. So that might be the 11th of October, the 12th, the 13th. And the y-axis is number of days. It's the cycle time. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start this at 20 days. So the maximum time that I'm anticipating any work item to be in this system would be 20 days. And if it turns out an item took more than 20, then clearly that scale just extends. And likewise here, the further right you are, the closer to today's point in time that you are, that would just keep going forever and ever for as long as you're tracking the data. So that's 20. That cycle time might be 10, 5, and 0. With our first very valuable item completed on the 10th of October, I could find that. And then I just need to find my way up to the 10-day point and put a dot. So on the 10th of October, one work item was finished. That dot now represents this data point. I hope that's straightforward. That dot is simply a visual representation of how long this work item took to go through that phase of work. And the more that you capture this data, the more data points you end up having, right? Maybe 2 things are completed on the same day. That's totally cool. And I want to just try and keep some maths simple here. And 10. Where they are doesn't really make a difference. But right now I've just drawn 10 dots. So we've hypothetically tracked 10 items going through their system, and now we visually represented those on the date that they now represent the date that they finished and how long they took to complete. Okay, very basic stuff, right? What we can then do, still basic, but because there are 10 items, I know that 100% of all those items is 10. if I wanted to find out how long it took for half of those items to go through their cycle, all I've got to do is count 50% of them. Right, so there are 10 total. 1, 2. I'm looking over here, right? So if I have my ruler gone. All I'm doing is counting up from the bottom until I hit those 5 items. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I could do a dotted line. That, because that's 50% of the work, that's our 50th percentile. So it's just a statement of fact that of this period that we're analysing, 50% of all of those work items completed in 9 days or less. And we could do that for any level that we wanted to. We could calculate this for the 80th percentile, the 90th percentile. 90% of all work was completed in 18 days or less. I hope that makes sense. That dotted line, they're simply percentiles. It's a percentage of all work that are completed within that period of time or less. And there's a reason why that's especially helpful. Okay. Screen. So I'll do this a slightly different way. I'll do it this way instead, because it can be with all of those dots. So hopefully you can see me in a corner and a digital representation of what I've just drawn. Hopefully. And the reason why I've done that is because it's very hard for me to just zoom in and zoom out and you to still be able to understand what's going on there. So I've like taken a section over here, so you can just see it's exactly the same thing. Cycle time up here and dates going out to the right with more dots than I drew. What stands out from this data? What stands out to you immediately? If you were looking at this in a retrospective, what kind of questions do you think you might be asking? If I had some music, if I was able to make my screen that work, I'd do that.
To answer your question, James, I think the one to the all the way to the right top corner, or a few things over there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that seems to be taking a lot more time, isn't it? Why is it
Thank
so?
you. Yeah, thanks very much. I mean, what we can a way that I might prefer, this dotted line that I drew, one of the reasons why that's so important is because we can have a conversation with our customers to say, well, when they ask how long something's going to take to get done, how confident do they want to be? So I just drew a line at 50% on the whiteboard. Up here, we've got different percentiles. These are just the 3 that I most commonly use, the 95th percentile, the 85th, and the 50th. Once we understand what level of confidence either our customers or maybe we're using this data to help engage with other teams about dependencies and when we expect to be a particular part of our workflow. That's another great way to be able to do this. But once we understand which one we're targeting, like let's say the 85th percentile, if we're saying that we want to try and use that as our yardstick and we want to aim for things to complete in 29 days or less, don't get excited about the fact that that's a month, which is far too excessive. But illustratively, if that's the thing that we're targeting, then really what we're doing is we could compare those things which have taken longer to do what we would expect in our system. And that's not to say that anything which takes longer than that 85th percentile is a significant issue, because let's face it, 15% of the time we do expect that work items are going to take longer than that 29. But that's certainly an inspection point, right? The difference between what we expect with our how long something might take to get done and how long things are taking to get done. And these are discussion points. I should add, so what we can't do is we can't make absolute assertions about why these data points look the way that they do simply by looking at the data, but they do help us to ask better questions. So some of the things that would stand out to me would be these trends. So we've got a diagonal line here followed by another prominent diagonal line. It turns out, because this is real teams data, I borrowed it off of somebody else in a community, and the history of this is what would happen is a team would pick up at the beginning of a month a whole period of work. They would start all of that work and essentially bring it into their start point and be able to say, yep, we've started that stuff, it's all in progress, we're good. The reality is it would take quite a long time to work through those work items. It would take longer and longer. So simply visualizing this was a tool that the teams were able to use, see that, visualize that dysfunction, and then make a change. The change that they decided to make was as simple as limiting their work in progress. The work in progress is another one of our flow metrics. I've talked about cycle time and now work in progress. And actually, the results that they saw, so if you just imagine that the team have now made a change and they're going through day by day being able to inspect their data, we're now getting more data into the system because they continue to work on items. You can see the difference in their picture, that the scattering is no longer spread so far apart. It's much more condensed down here. Actually, there are more dots as well. So each dot, the dots just represent throughput. And one of the reasons why I like this tool is because you don't need to do maths to understand this. You can visualize the fact that there are more dots, there are more blue dots over here, not just clustered together, but a higher concentration of them. I don't know how well it comes through on your screens, but some of these dots are more than one item. So 4 things, in this one that I've got highlighted, 4 work items were started on the same day, finished on the same day, and it's just represented by a number of 4 here. So the team, by reducing the amount of work that they had in their system at any one given point in time, they increased their throughput. And also another thing that you can, like a pro tip on it, is when we're looking at this part of the data, which is what I showed you to start with, the distance between the 95th percentile, the 85th percentile, and the 50th percentile, that's quite significant. There's quite a big range there. So if, for example, a customer was to ask how long something would take to get done, and we would talk about the 85th percentile of 29 days, if they want more certainty because there's something really critical going on, I'm not happy with 85%, I want more confidence. Sure, they can have more confidence, but it comes at the cost of additional data, almost twice, really. That's 30 days becomes a forecast of 44 to complete any given work item. But the team then put these process improvements in place, and watch what happens with those dotted lines. You can see how spread apart that they are, which essentially is a sign of an unpredictable system. And as you go forward in time, those lines get much closer together. The system is much more predictable as well. That's another benefit of doing this. I am going to resist the temptation of being naughty here and showing you something extra. Can I realistically do that? No, I've got to now, haven't I? There are other things that you can do with this data, like I'm going to go on a little bit of a pedestal about story pointing. So you no longer need to estimate. So given that the period that we're expecting, as long as the work that we've been completing over that period of time is somewhat similar to the work that we'll be completing in the future. Let's say, for example, our team are making T-shirts. It doesn't matter if some of those T-shirts are children's sized or extra large sized. We're just working through and creating T-shirts. So how long would it take to get, if a question might be, how long would it take me to get my tie-dye T-shirt? Well, assuming the team have been creating tie-dye T-shirts in amongst all the other stuff they've been delivering in the past, you don't need to lock engineers in a room and ask them how long it's going to take to get that thing done. you've got your historic data, which has included in that data set this work items. So we could confidently say with 85% certainty that tie-dye t-shirt would take 11 days or less. That's it. It's a range. We may be wrong 15% of the time, but there's the important part of actively managing, using our data to make informed decisions about the work we have in progress. The thing that I probably don't have time and I'll have to catch up on, I'm mentioning here because I've heard it come up in questions and things that got on in this talk. I've just visualized here story points. So this team had been using story points to estimate their work, and what you can see is just a visual indication of those. So anything that was a one story point is an orange dot. It's exactly the same information, it's just visual representation of those. I'm not going to ask you to spot these patterns, as much as that might be nice to get some engagement back. I am just going to tell you there is no real correlation, right? But it's reasonable, I think, to expect that 1 point stories would be all down the bottom, because it doesn't matter whether you're pointing on complexity, uncertainty, risk, effort, whatever. 1 point stories should probably complete similarly to other 1 point stories, right? But we've got some that down the bottom, some that take longer than 13 point stories, 21 point stories. It's nuts. So this team were also able to look at that data and realize how wasteful their estimation activities were. So that's why I wanted to focus on this, because I'm thinking of those times when this chart has led to some really great improvements for teams through retrospectives. Okay, let's get back on track. So by far and away my favorite tool to use to inspect. I'll emphasize again, we can't make that explicit decision about why the data looks the way that it does. It informs the conversations that you can have with the team. The team have been doing the work. It helps them visualize what's going on in their system. Factually, this is our system, and then they can have discussions about what to do about it. And so really, our question comes about what do we want to optimize for? I've talked about some flow metrics. I've clarified that you are expected to be tracking other metrics, assuming you're actually doing something with those metrics. And so the changes that you would want to make in your retrospectives all determine on what you want to be able to optimize for. For example, flow metrics won't necessarily help you optimize for customer satisfaction, but there are definitely measurements that you could take to make sure that you aren't just delivering the thing that was asked for, but you're delivering the thing that's wanted. So I would expect you to think about any of these options and potentially more. But if you're tracking those metrics, use them, reflect on them in their retrospectives, and decide how you can inspect and adapt. One word of caution, that all metric can be weaponized or gamed. I think weaponized may be self-explanatory, but for gaming, gamifying the metrics, I mean, have you ever heard this phrase before? Tell me how you'll measure me and I'll tell you how I behave. A great example is when teams are being measured on velocity and they're trying to improve their velocity. It comes down to trying to improve the way that they're story pointing or forecasting a number of story points that might get delivered in the future. Story points don't equal value. Working on it won't even improve estimates. Humans are really rubbish at estimating, which is another reason why I prefer that data. And there are so many other negative connotations that come with it. And I've certainly experienced teams then wasting time having discussions about how many story points that they can claim for unfinished work. It's not even something that really warrants a discussion. Whereas with the flow metrics, when people are trying to game flow metrics, what we want is to make sure that the data isn't showing that we've got too much work in progress. So we're not going to start it until we're confident that we can get it through the system. Great. But when people game these metrics, more often than not, they're positive behaviors. We want to improve our cycle time, so we'll only bring work into the system when there's a signal that we have capacity to get that through the system. Great. There is a risk that I have experienced teams that have said, well, I'm not going to bring it into progress, but I am going to work on it just because I don't want to affect the data. And that's a different challenge. That requires some conversations and some maturity, and probably a why. Why are we behaving like that when all we should be doing is focusing on getting through the work which is already in our system. So I've kind of covered this as well. What's so special about the flow metrics? Talked about the gamification. I haven't really talked about the understanding and improve the system. It takes us away from the individuals, focusing on individuals. We want to be able to focus on the system and people's activity in improving that system. Often focusing on the other two flow metrics, which I haven't mentioned, which are I didn't mention throughput. So you've had cycle time, they're up on the top right there. Cycle time, work in process, and throughput. Cycle time twice, that should be aging. Work item age. It's one that you can't visualize in the metrics that I've shown you because it's a leading indicator. The things that I've shown you, we measure once the work is completed. What we can do is we can use that information and looking at how long an active work item in progress has been in progress, and hopefully work as a team, as a system, to get that work through and completed. With improving the workflow, we're really talking about improving three areas. Those flow metrics being the MVP. If you didn't track any other metrics, that would be sufficient to look for improvements on how efficient the team are, or how effective the team are being, and how predictable they might be. And here's just a quick summary of what effective, efficient, and predictable is we're talking about in this context. And you would be forgiven for trying to find the sweet spot, but it's tricky. Normally, when you're if you make a change, try and improve the efficiency, you may well be having a knock-on impact, a negative impact in one of the other areas. So it is something that sounds simple. Well, no, it is simple. It's really simple to understand, but simple doesn't equal easy. A good example of how some of these things can be in conflict is FedEx. Most people should be aware of FedEx, a popular courier company in the States. They deliberately send empty cargo planes in the sky just so that they can be diverted at any given notice to handle unplanned demand. So that's something that's not very efficient, but it is effective. It allows them to provide their service. And I've allowed just enough time for questions, right? So I would love to hear from you. And I appreciate that I've had some technical issues going through that, and there's quite a lot of information. What would you like to know?
Well, I have one question about the tool you were using. So yeah, what is the tool, and how you bring the data from the sprints here, from Jira, from DevOps, from Azure DevOps? So how you're working? What is the process?
Yeah, so I chose that tool. I'm not trying to sell the tool. I think what I wanted to do is just show you how easy this stuff can be. You don't have to be a mathematician to do statistical analysis. It sounds scarier than it is often. So that tool is something called Actionable Agile, and I use it because most teams, the market share, most teams that are using some kind of issue tracking software are using Jira or Azure DevOps. There are plenty of others. There are plenty of other better ones, but they have the market share, and it's my opinion that they are only usable to do this work. Actually, focusing on work item age and flow, it's only usable if you have that plugin. That's what I assert. So Actionable Agile, it costs peanuts. I appreciate there's some people linking to it in the chat. I don't get any benefit out of recommending them. It's just simply, as a practitioner, if I'm working in an environment that doesn't have Actionable Agile, I would use my own license. It saves an awful lot of time to do some valuable things. And I don't know if that answered all of the questions. It was just, what's the tool? What else was there as part of that? Plugging it in, I think, was one of them. So it plugs in directly to Jira and Azure DevOps. There's also a standalone tool. So you are able to look up some documentation, and see, I was drawing out on a spreadsheet for a reason. If you can get your data into that, then you can push it into this tool. There are free things. People have provided some scripts and stuff. I just find them quite labor intensive. When it comes to, I don't really know what I'm doing with being able to use data to help teams improve. I would say save your time, worry, effort. Read one particular book from Dan DeCanty, which is Actionable Agile's Metrics for Predictability. And experiment and play with it. I wonder if somebody's got a question that's not specifically on the tool, but maybe about something, putting it into practice.
Do you want to ask the question yourself, or should I read it from the chat? I can read it from the chat. So Algirdas has asked, what's the worst case or funniest case you have seen metrics being abused or misunderstood?
What a great question. I don't know if it's work. I've been told off recently on LinkedIn for unintentionally being judgmental, as much as I was trying my best not to be. So I think I'm probably catching myself a little bit with how judgmental I'm being. I try not to be. I try to just take things as they are. That is the data. How do we as a team go ahead and improve it? I have worked in a place where I started to introduce flow metrics, and it was explained that we don't need that stuff here. And what I was trying to do is, the challenge here is about working at scale. And that environment was saying, well, we've got 20 software teams. We need them all to conform to one particular workflow so that we can manage them better and we can understand their data better. And I was able to convince them that actually at that tactical layer, we should just let teams do what they need to do. We've got different systems. They're slightly different to each other. It shouldn't matter to us if they want to administer their work on a cigarette packet. They should just be allowed to do what they need to do. But we think about the thing which is the most valuable. And so we, in that particular instance, I drew out one system here. We were really planning out a separate system, which was at a higher level. So the thing that was most surprising about this, at least surprising for them more so than me, is when we looked at the work item age and the cycle time, and we looked at the flow metrics for the things which had been in progress, there are work items which had been active for 600 days. That's not strict. That's not actually true, is it? It's not going to be accurate. That's a data hygiene problem. I think that's probably one of the most surprising things. I guess what it then led to is the more we were able to work on that challenge, they had a significant amount of time invested in planning, and I'd quantified that waste. So £40,000 a week was being wasted on producing project plans and concatenating that information. And the organisation have been on a journey to use the flow metrics as a way of addressing that challenge, saving themselves 40 grand a week. Okay. Maybe not a funny one, but it's probably the one that stands out most to me.
Okay. We have another question from Dave. He wrote, I love the flow metrics. How do you use these outside of formal retro sessions? Info radiators or other events?
Yeah, great question. So my head goes into two places here. Information radiators, as much as I'm a huge champion for teams understanding their own data, and one thing I didn't emphasize is we could be at risk of being those data champions, of becoming a single point of failure of a team not really understanding if let's say a scrum master or a Kanban coach, whatever, if they're not in the room, how can we inspect this data? It's really important that we do what we can to help all team members understand what options they might have for analysing their data. And perhaps if there's time, I could give you a piece of advice, a trick that I like to do with that tool that's useful. But the information radiators, I tend to then think, as much as that's useful for the team, for their radiators, they should be using this stuff all the time. I automatically go with like, how are we sharing information with management? So this instead of bringing management all the time to information, bringing them into rooms and letting them see data and ask questions, that we just provide the information and let people that are interested come and self-serve. That you can build dashboarding and stuff. There's all sorts of great things that you can do. Some of them can be tricky with the actionable Agile plugin, depending on how it's all set up. I think I'll struggle to put in too much time, but if you want to spend more time talking about that in your scenario, then just I mean, Dave, obviously we're connected anyway, but if anybody else wants to reach out to me on LinkedIn and talk through more on that side, I'll talk your ear off. I'm very passionate about this stuff. I think there was another part of the question which I've not answered.
So his question was like, how do you use these outside of formal retro sessions?
Absolutely. I mean, I don't know if anybody's noticed. I think I managed to avoid mentioning Kanban once. I didn't talk about Kanban at all in this talk. Kanban is about flow management. It's a strategy. It's not a framework. It's a strategy for improving the flow of value through your system. It doesn't matter. You don't have to be a Kanban team. You could be a Scrum team. You don't even need an Agile. You don't need to be an Agile team. You just need a process. If you have a process, you can identify a process, you can apply this stuff. And that's why I consciously avoided talking about Kanban. But here I am going to mention Kanban because there are no prescribed events in Kanban. And you can, and arguably should, I get so paranoid about this, the risk. I've spoken with people in teams before that they've gone through sprint planning. They've identified some kind of a dysfunction. Let's say that's the length of time that their review has taken or been bounced around and not been prioritized. And they've decided that instead of addressing that as a dysfunction with the team now, they park it until the retrospective, which is a week and a half away. So it's a week and a half of elapsed time when this dysfunction is going to go on. So there are particular metrics where it is helpful to inspect them every day. I didn't talk about a work item aging chart. How much time do I have before I'm at risk of compromising anybody else's time?
Right now we're kind of supposed to be like on the break, and then the next speaker will start at 2:15.
Okay.
So you still have 10 minutes.
Well, if you need that break, then go away. Then I guess I don't want people to just go constantly back to back.
I think people just like leaving they leave in calm as they want, really.
Cool. I'll show you guys once more then. Once you understand this thing, which is that cycle time scatter plot, the only stuff which is visible here are the things that are completed. I didn't talk about this because it's not really a retrospective item strictly, but when it comes to how we use this stuff daily outside of a retro, then by far and away the most valuable thing that a team could be looking at is this aging work in progress. If I actually bring up some different data, I'll bring up some example data. And look at this aging work in progress chart. What this is saying is everything which is in our system, which is past that start point but not finished and is currently active, there it is, visualized on a screen. And the way that a team can use this, if they choose to more frequently than fortnightly, I would encourage them to at least daily, is to understand where they should be focusing their effort. Often, when teams go through a daily scrum or something like that, they look to the right-hand side of the board and focus on getting that stuff out. That's good. That is a really good way to approach this. You're looking at the work, you're looking at how to prioritize getting things out of the system. But when you're looking at how old they are and prioritizing your time on the things which are the oldest, instead of looking at the right-hand side, you're looking top to bottom. You're looking at things that have been active for the longest and getting those out of the system. And let's say that we have this agreed expectation of how long something takes to get through our system. You can compare how it's aging against that target. If it happens to be the 85th percentile, I choose it just because it commonly is. The closer you get to that 85th percentile, the more likely that you are to see that breach the SLE. And like I say, it's not strictly an issue, because 15% of the time the work is going to take longer than 16 days. But we should be, unless we actively manage it and use that as a trigger about where we're going to focus the attention, then the great thing about this is it's a leading indicator. You can identify it and take some action before the work item is completed, and then you see, and you're not just looking at it when it appears as a dot as a cycle time, a cycle time scatter plot. I hope that's helpful. We've got one more. Maybe call it there then. I did flash up my LinkedIn info before. It's off screen now, and I don't think I'll share the screen because we're so over. But I think that's where I'm starting now to become more active on LinkedIn, and I'd love to connect with you guys there. If you're as passionate about this stuff as I am, then link up with me there. And thank you. There's a reminder about feedback. Like I say, this is the first time I've done a proper talk like this, and I'd really appreciate that learning opportunity.